Hi, this is Dom Robinson and welcome to my Deep Wreck Diver channel. Today's video is a story of unbelievable courage that led to this man, Master Frederick Parslow of the Anglo-Californian, being awarded the Victoria Cross for bravery in the First World War, one of only 2 merchant seamen ever to receive this honour. I'm ex-military, so was really disappointed in myself that I'd never heard this story until we got blown out on one of my Lusitania trips and we visited the graveyard in Cobe, mainly to visit the graves of the Lusitania victims. But then I spotted this one and I couldn't help but notice the fact he wasn't military, his age, 59 years old, and of course the fact that he was killed in 1915. So this was quite close to the beginning of the First World War, and everyone was trying to figure out what was going on with these newfangled submarines. The Anglo-Californian, meanwhile, was taking 1,000 horses into Britain for the war effort when she was spotted by the U-39, really famous German submarine with the skipper who ended up as the second most successful skipper of all time. Anyway, they spotted the Anglo-Californian and tried to sink it. Now, the story's an absolute cracker, and I'm going to go into it in a bit more detail later on. But the outcome was that Frederick was killed, but the Anglo-Californian got away and therefore lived to fight another day. Now, we were on our way back from the Lusitania exped, and we're on the ferry from Rosslare to Pembroke when we were doing some research into this story. And what we realised is that as we were doing the research, we were passing directly over the top of the wreck of the Anglo-Californian. So, although it wasn't sunk when Frederick Parslow won his Victoria Cross, it was sunk later on in the war. By this time, it had been renamed as the Vandalia and was owned by the famous Cunard line. So it was torpedoed and was resting in about 100 metres of water. So we spoke to all the people who might potentially have dived the site, and none of them had dived it. So it was really interesting. So we had this fascinating wreck on which a Victoria Cross had been won and which had almost certainly never been dived. So that's a great challenge, isn't it? So we sort of started the planning to try and figure out how we could dive it. Now, that area of the country, West Wales, is not an area where much technical diving takes place, not least because there's some really strong currents and the visibility is known to be poor. So we put together a plan, spoke to a local dive charter boat company and agreed some dates. Unfortunately, we got blown out, so we had to move the dates 12 months, and then that took us to 2022 when we all travelled, most of us from Plymouth, travelled up to West Wales and headed out to dive the wreck of the Vandalia. Now, we only had a window of 3 days, but we were all well dived up, having been on a deep exped to Malin only a month or so previously. So we took the decision that we were just going to go for it. We were going to do the Vandalia on our first day. Now, the one thing we'd not done is none of us had ever operated on the boat before, and I don't think we realised the size of it. So it was a bit more crowded perhaps than we would have liked, but we got everything on, and we needed an early start to get out and do to get on slack. So we cracked on out. Now, it's quite a long way out, so everybody made the most of the opportunity to get a few extra hours kip. Others amuse themselves in different ways.
At first I was afraid, I was petrified. Started thinking I would never live without you by my side. But I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong, and I grew strong. And I learned how to get along, and now you're back.
The good news is that the weather was fairly decent, sea state was fine, and obviously any dive or any trip out where you see dolphins is always going to be a good one. The skipper was a bit concerned about shotting the wreck, so it was agreed that I'd give him a hand and ultimately call where the shot went in. So we did that, and we got the shot in. And because I'd done most of the preparation, I was the person who got to go down the line first. As you can imagine, I was really excited by this prospect. Being the first down, completely undived wreck, really big one as well. Vandalia or Anglo-Californian is 7,000 tons, so it was going to be huge. And so in the water I went, and you can see there's Rick in front of me. The kind of weird things that are going past, we'll see more of those later on. Those are salps, which are a form of kind of organism. Loads and loads of them on the deco stops. So here I am with Rick. Now, one of the reasons I've not shown this video before, I'll put it up on the channel, is because actually the quality of the video is not great. In fact, that's a massive understatement. But even though the video quality is not great, what there is some really interesting stuff that happens on this dive. Some of it you'll see on the video, some of it I'm going to talk about. So what I would say is, if you're thinking about bailing out at this point, please do persevere. It's definitely going to be worth your while. As we head down the line, I thought I'd show you this, in fact, a couple of newspaper clippings. First one here is from the Cumbria Leader. Can't imagine that exists anymore. Says, big steamer attacked by pirates. Anglo-Californian makes for Queenstown Harbour. Queenstown, obviously the old name for Cove in the Republic of Ireland. Then it says, the steamer Anglo-Californian of London reports an attack by a German submarine. 12 persons and dead and 8 injured. The steamer is making for Queenstown Harbour. The Anglo-Californian is a very large steamer, being of 7,333 tonnes gross and 4,618 tonnes net register. She was built at Sunderland in 1912 and belongs to the nitrate producers SS Company Limited of London. This next one here is from the South Wales Post and is even more incredible, as it contains a German account of what happened with the Anglo-Californian. It talks about how the submarine, the U-39, had discharged her last torpedo shortly before sighting the Anglo-Californian. It then explains how they attacked using only shells from the deck gun, but how the Anglo-Californian kept on steering in circles. And the U-39 was going so fast that it kept on missing, and they were getting close to the end of their last shells. How the skipper of the submarine decided to aim at the bridge instead of aiming at the rudder, which he'd been doing previously. And then when eventually they ran out of shells, they used a machine gun and put a machine gun on the top of the submarine, and then riddled the bridge with ammunition. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Californian had some rifles on and they were firing back. So absolutely incredible. I mean, you can imagine what it's like. And then I think finally, just at the end, just as they thought they'd got them, what then happened was some destroyers turned up and started firing on the submarine. So the submarine obviously went under the water and then headed off. But the general view from the crew of the the view of the U-39 is that the captain of the Anglo-Californian deserved to have the Iron Cross, which is obviously a German gallantry medal. So really fascinating that the crew of the submarine that was trying to sink the ship, they had such a respect for the captain of the Anglo-Californian, Frederick Parslow, that they thought he deserved one of their own medals. Absolutely incredible. While I've been talking about that, you can see that I've been scootering down. Clearly 100 metres takes you quite a long time to get down. Those people who've watched my other videos will recognise that my buddy is none other than Rick Ayrton. Me and him have just done such amazing diving together. You'll also have seen that the visibility that started off pretty decent near the surface is really, really poor now. Loads of backscatter coming from all those particles in the water, and you can see that we're sticking quite closely together. Now, one of the things I need to point out is that the video mount that I'm using on this is I've got a GoPro attached to the handle of the scooter, and it's on one of those kind of classic GoPro mounts. And what you'll see is that during this dive, the GoPro kicks up and it looks up and then it looks down. So getting a decent video picture doesn't happen for very much. So I just want to kind of apologise for that in advance, but also to explain what's going on. Actually, on the second dive, what I do is I attach it to that thing on the front of the scooter. Now, you can see we've actually arrived at the bottom. and it's not good because clearly what we've arrived on is sand. So that's pretty rubbish, and I'm the bloke who called the shot. So ultimately, this is my fault. So we're 100 metres down, and we're on the seabed, not on a big wreck. And if you have a look there, you can see in front of me, though, there's a drag mark. So we knew, in fact, there's dogfish or catfish, if you prefer, I guess. So, yeah, so we knew there was a bit of current running. So this was always a bit of a risk. And when you get down to the bottom of a wreck and or a dive and you find there's a drag mark in the sand and you're not on a wreck, there's only one thing to do, which is you attach your distance line. And there you can see my reel is just coming out in my left hand there. So I'm going to attach my distance line to the bottom of the shot. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reel out up the drag mark, and hopefully at the end of the drag mark will be the wreck, because if you've put the shot in the right place and it's dragged off, then that should work, right? So that's what's going to happen now. Now, unfortunately, what has just happened, as you can see there, is I've knocked the GoPro. So instead of looking along the length of the scooter, the GoPro is now looking up, which is not great, unfortunately. So got the distance line attached, and obviously what's going to happen now is going to swim up the drag marks and hopefully find the wreck. The problem is that you're not seeing that. So what you're seeing at the moment is, I guess, the water in between if you draw an angle sort of between the top of the scooter and the bottom of my loop, that's what you're kind of seeing. Fortunately, I think I've probably realised the problem, and in fact, I think I've put the scooter back down again. You can see there's some rope on the bottom, which is probably a good sign, because it probably means there's some pots nearby or something. You can also see Rick is heading off there. He's in front of me. I'm obviously messing around somehow there, trying to probably get the video to look in the right direction. Clearly not working very well. And this is, at the beginning of this, I think I said that the video from this dive isn't great, and this is just a really good example of it. But what I would say is please kind of hang on in there, because there are some bits of it that are much better than others, and it is a really interesting thing. So what we're doing now is we're moving along the seabed. I'm actually scootering along and scootering up the drag marks, hoping to find the wreck. And the good news is we're going to find the wreck fairly soon, because otherwise this would be a really, really rubbish video. So we are going to find the wreck in a bit. But the problem, as you can see already, is that the visibility is rubbish. Even Rick, brilliant photographer that he is, with his amazing camera, even he couldn't get photos much better than this. I mean, obviously that's the top of the engine. It was from the second dive, but still not great visibility. Back on the bottom, yeah, I mean, you can see the video not showing very much, but the good news is very, very shortly, there it is. The wreck has come into view. So we found the wreck, which is absolutely amazing. And what I do is I tie on the distance line. And the reason I tie on the distance line is because I want the other divers to be able to get on the wreck. So what's happened while I'm tying on the wreck is Rick is sending up the pill. So that's going to arrive at the surface, and the other divers now know that we're on the wreck. I've secured the distance line to the wreck, so that they'll be getting in. And when they get in, they'll be bringing in the lazy shot. The second pair does that, and also bringing in a trapeze as well. So that's what's happening on the surface. I'm really happy. Obviously, found the wreck, tied on the distance line, and as you can see there, I've even sorted out the video camera on the handle of the scooter. So for a brief moment in time, you're going to get a bit of decent video on what it's actually like down here. I mean, obviously, it's not decent video. The conditions are rubbish, but we're on the wreck. So it's an opportunity to kind of have a look around. Now, what I've done is I've left the reel on the wreck. And the reason I've done that is because I feel that I'm going to be able to navigate back to where the reel is, just using a bit of pilotage. So, knowing what I know about the wreck, I can find my way back. So that's my plan. And off we go. We're having a look for the wreck. We're trying to figure out exactly where we are on the wreck. People who've watched my other videos will know that's the first thing that you do when you arrive. So what we're looking for is all the usual kind of stuff, maybe some boilers, maybe an engine, a prop perhaps, or some anchors or some winches or something like that. You can see the wreck is quite smashed up, but we're looking for something. And you can see Rick's around. There's clearly, there's some ribs sticking up there, but conditions are really, really poor. Loads of silt. That's probably the edge of the wreck round about there. There's Rick. We've both got our scooters. Totally unnecessary on this dive. Although actually quite handy, I guess, for getting to the wreck when we were scootering along. So now that's interesting. That's clearly a big winch there. And if you have a look off to the right there, you can just about see an anchor fluke. So there's two chains there. So this is definitely the bow of the wreck. So that is great news. We know where we are on the wreck, and we know it's at the bow. So that's always a nice position. And clearly, you would normally expect the bell to be around here somewhere, especially if it's not been dived before. So taking our time, having a look around, trying to find that kind of thing, trying to find anything, frankly. But the viz is making it really, really difficult. At this point, it's probably worth mentioning what's happening at the surface. So the second pair in are going in, and they're going in with the lazy shot, as I said. They're going in with the trapeze. And what actually happens is they get on the shot line, they try to attach the lazy shot, and they don't clip it on properly. So when they let go of it, the lazy shot on the trapeze just drifts off. So all of a sudden, they're kind of faced with a decision about what to do. And what they decide to do is to get back on the boat. Now that becomes really important later on. So they go back to the boat. They effectively reset. Now that takes quite a long time. So underwater, we're expecting towards the end of our dive to start seeing other divers. We're completely oblivious to what's happening on the surface. We're expecting that when we get back to the shot line, that there'll be other divers, other distance lines, other strobes, all the usual kind of paraphernalia. And as you'll see when we get back there's none of that kind of stuff. So it's one of those things. It happens, and you'll see what the kind of consequence of that is later on towards the end of the dive. Meanwhile, as you can see here, we've disturbed a bit of the silt. We've kicked it up a bit. That's probably the scooters, really. And you can see it's just a really confusing, broken mess that we're having a look around. We're trying to find our way around. Now, it's probably worth sort of talking about how the Anglo-Californian / Vandalia came to be where it is now. So after the encounter with the U-39, which killed Frederick Parslow and which he recovered his Victoria Cross, I've already mentioned that the ship was eventually sold to the Cunard line and renamed the Vandalia. Oh, sorry, there's an anchor. You can probably just see there's a fluke off to the sort of bottom left-hand side. So Frederick Parslow's son, who was also named Frederick Parslow, was on the bridge with his father when his father was killed. He took over as master of the Vandalia, and he was at the helm when the Vandalia was sunk later on in the war by another really successful German submarine, the U-96. Slight segue. One of my other videos is about us identifying the U-95, obviously a sister ship of the U-96. If you haven't watched that, you might like to do it. So, the Vandalia was torpedoed later on in the war and obviously currently rests where it is on the seabed. Very sadly, the younger Frederick Parslow, he survived that sinking along with all his crew. He later vanished in the 1930s when the ship he was on sunk somewhere in the Atlantic. Really, really sad. He was awarded the DSC, the Distinguished Service Cross, in the same action that his father won the Victoria Cross. So a really sad ending for Frederick Parslow Jr. and but also explains why the Vandalia is where it currently is on the seabed. And I say the Vandalia because, of course, we haven't actually seen anything to conclusively identify this as the Vandalia, other than it's a really big wreck. And obviously, it was quite well known where it sunk. All the crew survived, all the crew got off. This ties in with the German sinking reports and everything. So we have a high level of confidence that this wreck is the Vandalia. So back to the dive. Here I am. I'm looking around. So what's become obvious to me and Rick is that we don't know where the distance line is. Now that's a really big issue. Obviously, we're a long way offshore. We need to get back to the shot line and then to the lazy shot. So finding that distance line is really important. The whole dive, whereas it had become about trying to find something to identify the wreck previously, has now become about trying to find the distance line. So there's quite a bit of adrenaline going, as you would expect, and we are trying to sort of track back in our footsteps. But the visibility, as I've already shown you, is really poor. Now, unfortunately, what this video doesn't show is the kind of me and Rick really communicating with each other. We were also talking to each other. And, I remember one point turning around to Rick and going, "Where's the shot line?" And Rick was like, "I don't know." And so all of a sudden, that's what the dive becomes about. Now, you can probably see that we're going down a side of the wreck, and we weren't certain which side of the wreck the distance line was on. It seems like crazy. It seems crazy. There are only two sides to a wreck, but that's how bad the conditions were and how much we'd kicked up the silt. So we think we're on the right side. We think we know where the distance. Well, no, we don't think we know where the distance line is. We're gambling that the distance line is on the side of the wreck that we're on. So that's the whole point of this dive now becomes about that. Bearing in mind that we're 100 odd meters, we've actually been underwater for quite a long time. So bottom time is really limited at this depth if you want reasonable run times. So we're desperately trying to find the distance line. And I think this kind of adrenaline that we've got and the stuff that's going on probably explains why the decision I make in a bit wasn't the best one. I was just keen to get back to the surface. Or keen now to find the shot line, and then when we, as you'll see in a bit, we do find the shot line. Keen to get back to the surface. So you can see here we're looking around, looking for the shot line, trying to find it, what we haven't really done at this point is twigged that there aren't any other divers on the wreck. So all that stuff that I talked about on the surface is still going on. So they're trying to put the shot line in. Trying to put the lazy shot line in. They're trying to get other divers in. We would have expected that sequence to be really quick, and it isn't, just because the first pair weren't able to achieve their task. So I guess when stuff happens and you don't know what's happening, that kind of putting things out of sequence or unexpected events can cause to make decisions that you might not otherwise do. So that's kind of where we are. That's kind of what's going on. But you can see here, this is the side of a wreck. You can see that's a plate. And if you just have a look in front of me, that white line that I've just spotted there, that is a distance line. This was a great moment. I was really, really pleased to see that distance line, that white line. And my reel is at the end there. You probably just caught a brief glimpse of my reel. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to leave the distance line tied to the wreck, and I'm going to reel back along to where the shot line is. You remember there was that grapple that I tied the distance line onto. So I'm going to be reeling back to that. I think I'm probably just here, just making sure that Rick is around. I'm fairly certain I catch that. You probably see there. You can see his lights there. So Rick is around. So that is great. I'll be communicating him, letting him know that I've got it, and therefore that we need to be getting back to the shot. I'm sure Rick has already realised that, but you've got to make sure that everybody's on the same song sheet. So got the distance line, and very shortly I'm going to be heading back to the grapple, and that's all good. So unfortunately, as you can see, the video is kicked up now. For the obvious reason, I'm not paying that much attention to the video at the moment. It's my entire focus has become about getting the distance line, getting back to the shot line, and getting ourselves up so that we can start decompressing. The longer we're down here, the longer the amount of deco we need to do and all those kind of things. And actually this dive, I think the total run time is about 3 hours 20. You probably just saw a bit of a glimpse there of the two lines, the one that's going to the wreck and the one that I'm laying going back to the grapple. Unfortunately, there's no video of this, so you're just going to have to take my word for that, for what's going on. What I would say is if you focus, in a moment, you're going to see a very brief glimpse of the grapple actually being held in mid-water, so that the force of the tide on the grapple is pulling it up, and the line that I've laid to the wreck is holding it onto the wreck, so the grapple is in mid-water, which I think shows the strength of the tide. Now, if I'd have thought about it, it also shows probably that there's a load of divers on the line coming down. But as I say, my kind of focus is on other things. So when I get to the grapple, I'm really surprised not to see any other distance lines. And I guess at this point, my focus is on getting up. There you go. There's the shot line. It's actually being held in mid-water. There's the grapple. You can see it's not on the seabed anymore. So I'm faced with a decision about what to do. And I know that we're going to plan again. We've only got the one grapple. I don't want it to be tied to the wreck. I don't want to lose the grapple. What I should have done at this point is tied my distance line onto the grapple. What I actually do, as you can see there, is I cut the lines. So the grapple is now on the seabed, back on the seabed, but you can see it's starting to drag. So, and drag away from the wreck, obviously. So that was a mistake by me, and so we're now starting to ascend. You can see Rick and me, we're heading up, and what we're going to see in a moment is some other divers coming down. They've finally got the lazy shot sorted. They've got in the water, and there's actually several pairs of divers above us here. So they're going to come down, and at this point, I'm going to really regret cutting the distance line. But I kind of tell them, in fact, there you go. You can see this torch is starting to come down. I'm going to tell them that if they head off in the drag line, that they're going to find the wreck. Unfortunately, what actually happens is the current is now so strong. In fact, sorry, it's not them. What we can see is our strobes. You will see above them. In fact, there you go. You can see a torch. That's another diver. The current is so strong, the grapple is moving so much that even though they really go for it and they have a good swim towards the wreck, they never actually get to it. So on this dive, the first dive, the only people who get on the wreck are Rick and myself. Now you can imagine when we get to the surface after all that deco and all that sort of stuff, we took a lot of stick for this. And quite rightly, if I was the other divers, I would be a bit unhappy with me. I mean, clearly I pointed out that it was their fault for not getting the lazy shot in, but frankly, that didn't really cut much slack. So nobody else gets on the wreck today. We do go back tomorrow, and everybody does get on the wreck, which is great. They tell me and Rick that we've got to go in last, because we obviously mucked up today, and that's a fair call. So so that was the story of our dive on the Vandalia on day one, and it was a bit of a cluster, but we did get on the wreck. I guess there's a positive, and we didn't obviously find anything to identify it. Nobody got hurt, and actually one of the things we realised is that we were out too late for slack. So when we dive it the next day, we come back a lot earlier, and that certainly makes the current on the wreck much easier, even if it doesn't make the actual doesn't make the visibility any better. So the great thing about this dive was once we got it back up shallow, then the visibility became absolutely fantastic. And this epic photo Rick took of me on deco stops, you can see there is just life in the water everywhere. The dive talk guys called these aliens. They're not. There's something called salps, which are kind of some sort of organism. For some reason, at some points of the year, you just get absolutely tons of them. Also associated with things like this as well, which is clearly some sort of jellyfish. I've got no idea what it is, but once again, the points in the water column, these things were absolutely everywhere. People also always like to know about the deco profile. So that's a deco for this dive. You can see there about 23 minutes left bottom. Total run time rather of about 3 hours or 3 hours 20. So did a bit of extra at the end. That's our trapeze with our with the team on. You can see it all got sorted in the end, which is really, really important. When you get to the surface, that's obviously a great sight. Now, the boat we were using had a couple of little idiosyncrasies. One of them is it had this kind of platform at the back of the boat, and the lift was to the left of the platform, and there was this kind of notch to the right that you had to go through to get into the main kind of kit stowage area, and you could just see Fran coming through it there. Now, that all made it a bit more challenging, so we kind of got into this routine of people helping each other get the kit on and off before you got on the boat. The other really memorable thing that happened to me. So I was the last person out of the water from that second dive, and I got on the lift, and for whatever reason, instead of pressing the up button on the lift, the down button was pressed, and so I ended up going down in the water. And for whatever reason, that happened again. And at that point, the lift actually came out of the runners, so the lift was flapping in the effectively in the breeze with me on it, just held only by the wire to the top of the winch. So at that point, I obviously got off the lift, and there was no alternative means of getting on the boat. So what then happened for about the next 20 minutes is I hung on the shot line while everybody on the boat did their level best to try and get the lift back in the runners, which absolute credit to them, they managed to do, and they managed to get me on the boat. But I have to say, when I got on there, I was very, very pleased. So great trip to dive the Vandalia, West Wales. Didn't conclusively identify it, but can always go back. Hopefully, you get some better visibility. Learned some interesting lessons from the dive. Obviously, it's a fabulous story. Frederick Parslow, Victoria Cross. He's a man who deserves to be far better known than he is. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. And these are the great bunch of people who I dive with. And I'd like to thank all of them for being part of a fantastic trip. And look forward to seeing you on my next video.